Many times, negative events impact on us really badly, and we struggle to overcome those events and move on with our life. But what if the negative events weren't actually bad? What if they were part of a bigger picture? What if they were part of a balance that we need to come to terms with? This is the story that Emmanuel Anthony shares. Enjoy this podcast as he talks about how to find balance between the positive and negative in your life.
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. Today, it's my great pleasure to welcome Emmanuel H Anthony. He's a human behavioral expert dedicated to teaching universal laws which assist human beings achieve outstanding results. Emmanuel founded Quantum Equilibrium and the Emmanuel Anthony Institute. His focus is perfecting the art of communication, healing, advanced educational platforms, and shifting paradigms in human potential and awareness. Welcome, Anthony.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Actually, you say the welcome and I say thank you, I believe. That's how it's meant to go. Thank you for having me on the show.
It's a great pleasure, Anthony, and looking at the work that you do, it's quite amazing. Can we step back in time, though? Can we go in the Wayback Machine and go back to what actually drove you to start this? What's some of your history? What drove you to start this and to actually help people and doing the things that you do?
Well, coming to Australia at about 4 years old, I believe it was about 4, I didn't speak English very well. And I was inspired to learn how to speak English because it seemed to be a way in which I could communicate and make friends. And it was really about social mastery when it first started. But when you're learning a new language, it takes a bit of time. So as I was really putting my English together, and it wasn't the major words, but it was structuring it into a sentence so that I could communicate to people in a way that really understand it, I would replicate and copy the cool kids because I feel that I was a cool kid.
So you learned the swear words. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I learned all the swear words. It's the first thing you learn when you come to Australia. But that was my introduction to human behavior. And as I started to replicate and have a look at their behaviors and what they did and almost test it out on other kids, I was really finding a way to understand human behavior. And I studied everything from their mannerisms with their hands, their tone, the way they said it. It was almost like a stand-up gig. When would they deliver the punchline? And I would try it again and again. Yeah. And going through primary school, I was picked on and I was bullied. I was physically small and mentally acting very weak. Yeah. And that really led to me having a value for communicating, creating social power, and wanting to empower myself physically. And today I teach a subject by Dr. John Demartini called Values, and it clearly specifies that your values come from your voids, that of which you perceive to be most missing. So with those areas being the most missing, I dedicated pretty much the whole of my primary school, from coming to Australia all the way through to my high school, to socially empowering myself. I eventually became popular. I ended up learning how to really understand communication and the art of communicating with people. And that worked very well for me when I completed those voids. But around the age of 25, I had a lot of emotional challenges around my father, and I never really let go of them. And now I was in the opposite spectrum. I was attending a lot of amazing functions, meeting a lot of interesting A, B, and C grade celebrities. I was doing doorman work at nightclubs, and now I was in the public eye and meeting a lot of people. But I had a lot of this emotional baggage that I realized that if I didn't resolve, somehow I was going to come out and potentially in a public space. So I dedicated myself to finding out how I could resolve that. And in doing that, I found a gentleman called Dr. John D. Martini from America.
Yeah.
And I attended his breakthrough experience and broke through 26 years worth of baggage towards my father in about 4 hours.
Right.
And in dissolving all of those emotions, my mind was clear for the first time ever in my life. And as I looked at him on stage, I realized that my whole life I'd been inspired to help people to create change and finding ways to do that anytime I could. But in that moment, I realized that I could give myself permission to do that. And that was, I'm 38 today, turning 39 this year. And I've been doing that since I was 26 and a half, I'd say. So it's been an amazing mission.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. How did you, if we go back, stay in the Wayback Machine, I like that term. I don't know why, but it's just stuck with me. With that, when you were younger, you came here, as you said, you're 4 years old. You didn't speak English, so you wanted to learn English, which is, I mean, was that something you were, obviously you were consciously aware of that, but at 4 years old to go, okay, I want to learn English, was that something that you felt a drive for inside at that age? Or?
It was probably shortly after 4, because, I kind of grew up and I felt socially outcasted. I spoke fluent French, but I just didn't feel as connected.
Yeah.
And I saw everyone else hanging out, and I wanted to hang out with them. And it just wasn't working out. And then I noticed that there was a hierarchy. There was kind of a pecking order, and there were the cool kids, and there were people kind of go through in between, and then those that were picked on. And I was kind of in the middle, but every now and then I got picked on. And I wanted to know why that was happening. Why was I physically getting picked on, and why did I feel that I was mentally not as strong as other people? So that was part of more a journey to get strength in those areas, because I felt that there were weaknesses, and those weaknesses were occupying time and space in my mind.
Right. And do you think, because I was listening to that as you were saying, because you have a French background, and I'm just thinking, as a young child, that probably wasn't to your advantage. But if you were in like a teenager or a late teenagerhood, the French accent would have been really helpful in the dating scene.
I think so. I think the era that I came to Australia, it was a very different era. Here and now, big kids probably hear that, and that was pretty cool. And if it was later on, women would think it's very sexy. But as a young kind of, 4, 5, 6-year-old trying to figure out how to hang out with everybody, not being able to do that, it kind of felt a little more ostracized that I was by myself and everyone was there. The truth was I still had friends, but I didn't feel that I was in control of the ability to walk up to somebody and confidently create a friendship. Today, I'm used to speaking to people all around the world, via podcasts like this or consulting, where I have to meet people and create a relationship straight away. It's very easy, but at that particular point in my life, that was one of the scariest things I could imagine.
That's an interesting point. And if we can stay on that, because you say you had friends, and I'm guessing, and I can relate to this, I wasn't part of the cool group when I was younger. And there's always that, how do we, there's that, because that seems like the place to be. But as you say, you had friends, but you didn't feel that you had, and I wrote here, you didn't have the feel you had the confidence to walk up to them. Was that because of you mentioned bullying before? Was that because of bullying, or was it because of your own perception in yourself?
No, it's never because of the bullying. I like to tell people that the bullying was a byproduct of me not mastering specific areas of my life, because any area that I had strength, I wouldn't allow that to occur. But any area that I was myself, I would allow people to come in, and they were there and attracted in my life in order to help me grow in that area. The funny thing about the bullying is that one of the kids that bullied me, Sean Myers, 15 years later on Facebook, asked me to come and catch up with him. And I remember being scared shitless of this guy. That might be a swear word in other countries. You might need to bleep that out. In Australia, that's just normal. Yes. But he messaged me on Facebook and said, would you like to catch up? And I met him at a local shopping center, and he handed me about, I think it was like $600-700 worth of goods from a bodybuilding. And he turned around and looked at me and said, I just want to say I've been following you on Facebook, and I was doing doors at that time. And he said, "You always got beautiful women around you. You've done an amazing job with your body. I honestly wish I had your life." And I felt like I was in a parallel universe. So I was
Yeah.
like, in grade 5, I was scared that this guy was going to beat me up, or he must ask me to eat grass, and I pretended to eat it and actually went down on my all fours and got it into my mouth and spat it out when he wasn't looking. Now the same guy is telling me that there are aspects of my life that he looks at and he wishes that he had it. So that was a very interesting thing. But it was always me. It was, as long as I put other people on pedestals and compared myself to them instead of seeing where I had what I see in them equally, because I was too humble to admit that what I saw in them I had in me. As long as I had them on a pedestal and compared myself instead of owning my own genius, I was always going to beat myself up. And I did a lot of that in primary school. But then in high school, I kind of snuck into the cool kids crowd because I came in year 7 and my cousin was in year 12. Oh, he was in year 11, pardon me. And he was one of the cooler kids. And in that period of school, they actually did flush your head down the toilet.
Yeah, no,
And,
I was there.
yeah, so a lot of that happened. Today, you couldn't get away with it. Back then, they did that.
Yeah.
So all I had to say was I had an older cousin and nobody would mess with me. So I snuck in, and now all of a sudden I was popular.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because that non-popular from grade 6, and then all of a sudden year 7 I am. It happened so quickly, I didn't know how to take it. It took me a little while to adjust to that.
Yeah.
But once I did, I started owning the things I saw in the cool kids, because I hung out with them. I realized a lot of the things that I put them on pedestals for, there was another side to it, and they were just regular people.
Yeah, that's interesting what you say about putting people on pedestals, because I'm thinking about that from my own perspective, very early in life, because people say, oh, when we have these aspirations and we look at someone successful and you might go, oh, I want to be like Steve Jobs, or I want to be like, some athlete. And that's my ambition. For very early in my life, I don't know why it changed, but I stopped doing that. I just said, I want to be the best me. I'm going to be the Damian Andrews. And I was just wondering, from your perspective, when you put people on pedestals, you obviously stopped doing that and looked to yourself and gave yourself your own self-worth, or recognized your own self-worth. How did you go through that process? How did you, decide to recognize that and make that change?
There's about 3 answers to that. The first one is intuitively, because I teach a subject today around human values, so I'll go into that as part of this answer.
Yeah.
But the first part was intuitively.
Product placement, go for it. So
yeah, if you meet a woman and you get to know her or partner, the first time you see her, she's hot to tot. You may think you're infatuated with her, you've got her on a pedestal.
Yeah.
But after a year of dating her, especially if you live together, you realize that they eat and breathe and poo and fart just like the rest of us.
Yeah.
And the beauty that you may have looked up to also keeps the bathroom considerably dirty with beauty products before you go out and look after. And that beauty also comes with a range of guys trying to pick her up on Instagram. And you see the other side of the things that you put on a pedestal, and eventually you realize that these human traits have 2 sides.
Yeah.
So that intuitively happened. But then secondly, when I went through my bodybuilding phase at about 17 to 26, I think it was around 21, I met a guy called Lucky, who was an amazing bodybuilder going for his pro card. And this guy had shoulders the size of my legs put together. It was absolutely ridiculous. And one day I asked him, I said, who are the bodybuilders that you're most inspired by and look up to? And he said his own name. He said, me, Lucky. And at first I thought it was cockiness and arrogance, but it was actually genius when I asked him why. And I said, so not Kai Green. And I mentioned a range of other bodybuilders, and he said, no, not Phil Heath or anybody else. He said me, because every second I spend looking at them is a moment I take away from me. And the only person I have an opportunity to create an amazing body for is myself. So I may watch their videos to have a look at different ways of training or things like that. But the only person that I look up to is myself. Yeah. And that really clicked with me. So that was the second side. And after that, I really gave myself permission. The third one was once I met Dr. John Demartini and started studying human values. We can put people in 3 places: on a pedestal, where we exaggerate aspects of them and minimize them within ourselves. So it's a comparison. We'll only put somebody on a pedestal for an area that we're minimizing within ourselves. Yeah. We can put somebody in a pit where we look down at them and exaggerate that part of ourselves and minimize it in them. Yes. And we can also put somebody in our heart where they're equal to us, and it's reflective awareness. The truth is there is only reflective awareness, but within our perceptions, we put people above and below us. But there's an exercise on the DiMartini method sheet, which is an exercise that helps you bring balance to your emotions and your perceptions. And one of the columns, and this goes back to Aristotle, and it was spoken about in ancient times that, and even Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, and the creators of modern psychology, said that what you perceive in others is nothing but a reflection of what you see in yourself.
Yes.
So this column says, what specific trait, action, or inaction do you dislike or despise or admire and look up to in somebody else? So let's say I looked at somebody's success. It would then ask you, where and where have you demonstrated and displayed that within your life? And you look for every decade, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, whatever age you are. So if you're 25, you go 20 to 25. But if you're 70, you go all the way through to 70. And then you look in all 7 areas of life: physical, financial, mental, spiritual, social, vocation, and family. And as you look through that, you own, and the wisest thing to do is own over 100 in each area. So you'll end up with 700. And you drastically evolve your awareness to thinking, hey, I've got success in this area. Oh, that person has it and I don't. To actually, we're both successful. It's just in a different form. Then you'll find out that the form in which you're successful is what you value. I value human evolution, development, and growth. That's why I do it 12 hours a day. I value family creation with my fiance. That's why I hang out with her afterwards, because that's what gives me energy and vitality. And the third is golf. But anything outside of that, I procrastinate, hesitate, and frustrate. So owning my genius in those areas and seeing what I saw in others through equal reflective awareness, but then also balancing out the trait too, because we can take certain human traits and exaggerate them and make them more positive. So then there's 2 other columns, but one of the columns, column number 10, then gets you to look at the other person and see the drawbacks when they demonstrated and displayed that trait. So you actually balance your perception of it and realize it has 2 sides. And then the next column, 11, gets you to see the drawbacks when you've demonstrated that. That reduces cockiness, allows you to have more of a balanced perception, increases your resilience, and stops the probability, especially if this person's in your life, of putting them on a pedestal. Because anytime you put somebody in a pedestal, you inject their values into you, minimize yourself, and then you increase the probability of them using you and walking all over you. So it creates much more of an equal exchange and rational emotions, and much more of a balanced human physiology and psychology too.
Wow. That's what I'm hearing from that is you decided within yourself that you were going to recognize you as being an amazing person and not diminish yourself or put yourself above. It was just, you're not comparing yourself to others. It was just, you're comparing yourself to you. I would imagine from reading what you've done, you compare yourself to what you've done before and you're always aiming to improve. With that, so from that perspective,
I just quickly add one thing there.
Yeah, sure.
We're always going to compare ourselves to one degree or another to other people. I always tell my students, it's how you compare. So I'm not looking to compare myself to somebody else so I can be them. I usually aim to compare something I'm doing or striving to achieve in my life to them, because if they've done it more than I have, they've laid out the roadmap. And I may want to overview their roadmap for a bit of a shortcut. So then that way I have an opportunity. Because if I say I want to be a phenomenal speaker, then I may look at John DiMartini, my mentor, who does, I was looking at his speeches. I think one year he'd done 306 speeches in a year, which is almost one speech a day. And I may look at that and say, okay, well, there's a standard. And I can choose where I want to go in that. But I now know that there is a standard within the industry that I can have a look at and set a goal in correlation to. But there's no need to compare myself in the same type of speaking or what we do. But I will select the aspects that I want to compare and then use those as markers as I adjust or set my sails.
Yeah. Okay, because what I wanted to do with that was, because there was a lot in those 3 points, even though they were 3 points, well, now 4 points, but within those 3 or 4 points, there was a lot of sub points in there as well to unpack. There was so much information, which is great that this is recorded so people can go back and review that. But the part that you just finished on there, which is really important, was you recognize the difference between there's a standard in the industry and a standard which you set for yourself. Yeah. Because if we were to take the complete, in a pyramid of a hierarchy, for example, where if you take sports, for example, and let's take, you're in Sydney, so we'll take rugby. At the end of the day, there can only be one championship team. So as you go through the season, you progressively work through, and there's one championship team. There's a number of factors which are going to determine who is the championship team, and there's a bit of luck in there as well. There's obviously a lot of skill. And there's a number of factors that contribute to that. But if you're comparing yourself to your self-worth is by that standard of which have so many factors in there, and you'll know from yourself as well, you've dealt with a lot of businesses, there can be so many great ideas out there for a business. And you go, well, that should work. And with all the effort that people put into it, it just doesn't get up. There's the factors, and it's just completely outside of what would seem logical. So there's factors outside of that. But if we compare ourselves, as you say, if you take the industry stand and say that's my self-worth, then that putting that on a pedestal, if I heard you correctly, is then diminishing your own value. You're then feeling less worth about yourself, and then probably less motivated to do things. Is that?
Yeah, so it's not wise to invest your worth into something that has rocky foundations.
Yes.
That's basically what you're saying. Your self-worth comes from a few things. Mm-hmm. Number one, your ability to dissolve emotional baggage. Because for everything that you hold on to emotionally that's imbalanced, it occupies time and space in your mind, psychology, and in your body, physiologically. So if you meet somebody and they've got a lot of emotional challenges, things that have happened in the past, haven't let go of, they're not usually very confident people. They're usually very shy and refrained because they don't want to head out to their outer world because they're too busy dealing with the inner world.
Yeah.
But the second is congruency, doing what you love and loving what you do. In human values, every human being on planet Earth has a unique set of values. And we're not talking about honor and integrity and all of those things. You're honorable and integrable when you're doing what you love. So I just mentioned before that human evolution, development, and growth. I've worked 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. Used to be 7 before I met my fiance. And I've done that. And that's a very healthy schedule for me because I'm a kid in the candy store. Every time I do it, I've got a lot of energy. But if you give me the dishes or anything else, all of a sudden I start to get tired and yawn and procrastinate and frustrate. So if you do what you love and love what you do, you naturally unlock energy and vitality. You have an increase in attention surplus order. You also neurologically, you myelinate the connections between the things that you actually appreciate. That's why if somebody asks you a question about an area that you love, you can answer it straight away. If they ask you about a question about something that's lower on your values, it takes you a while because your body neurologically isn't connected to that. So if you do what you love and love what you do, and what's most in alignment with your values, your self-worth goes up. So does the amount of eustress. Eustress is when you take positive and negative equally, and it's a healthy version of stress. But when you do what you love, I've played basketball my whole life. Michael Jordan going out and playing another game that was challenging wasn't stressful for him. That was eustress because he was looking forward to the potential of evolving, the challenge, and the support of the people that are helping push him up as well. So you take support and challenge equally, which is maximum resilience. But when you're doing things you dislike, you try and avoid the negative and go to the positive, and that creates quick fixes. Now you're de-stressed or stressed. So you can either have eustress or you can be stressed. So doing what you love, loving what you do, and authentically doing what's most meaningful to you. That's why your identity is what you most identify with, and it's wisest to invest that into what you value. So that's the second thing. So dissolving your emotional baggage, doing what it is that you love, and then owning all the human traits within inside of you. Because if you're trying to delete half of you and live an authentic life, it's not going to work. You're the saint and the sinner, the hero and the villain. I've done videos saying, stop trying to be the nice guy. In fact, I may kind of challenge some of the things that you said at the start, but I'll bring it around into a way where we're saying the same thing. Whenever people say, are you looking for a peaceful world? I said, there's no such thing as a peaceful world. The world is conserved of peace and war. That's why we've always had it. The reason that occurs is because if you study the atom is comprised of a positive and negative energy. And Einstein spoke about a quantum entanglement. Anytime you play with one side of the frequency, it actually balances out the other side. So every aspect of the universe, from the photon, which is one of the smallest units of light, is actually conserved with pain and pleasure, peace and war. And the more we're addicted to peace, the more we actually start to attract a war within our lives. So the key is to actually learn how to embrace both. And the master is the person that understands how those transformation occurs and has the ability to solve the biggest pieces and wars within the world, because that's the person that people follow. The leader is the one that can solve those problems, and the followers are the ones that are stuck within the lower problems of that and try and evolve. And the balance of those two is what we call love. Now, if you look at relationships, we always attract a partner that at the start we think is similar to us, because when we're infatuated, we see more positives than negatives. Oh my God, you've got two eyes like me, you've got one nose, you've got hands, we obviously must be together. But then after a year of dating somebody, they're so friggin' annoying, They're constantly, the thing that used
Your
to,
focus has changed. You're not
yeah,
focusing on the things you like anymore.
their intelligence turns to arrogance, their good looks
Yeah.
turns to it takes too much time. You start to see the other side. And
Yeah.
now you realize that there's actually two sides. So the more that you can embrace both sides, the greater you have a chance of resilience and growth and maximizing human potential. And
Yeah.
you decrease your emotional volatilities and actually end up transitioning. In fact, tomorrow I'm doing a talk with the Aboriginal community, some of the higher heads within that. And it's at 10 a.m. till 4 p.m., just talking about maximizing resilience. And what we're going to be doing is taking all of their perceived negatives and showing them all the benefits of it until they're grateful and appreciative and see why they've attracted it. And then they resolve their emotional states instead of doing that in months or weeks, doing that within seconds and hours.
Yeah. I want to go through each of those 3 points, but to come to that point of what you're talking about there of resolving that and finding the good in that, finding, as you say, resolving that, and you can do that in an instant. I completely agree with that. And what I'm wondering from that perspective, can we go back to the first point of baggage? And because you mentioned for yourself, that was a journey that you went through, and it took some time for you to realize that was something you had to overcome with your father. Do you want to explain a bit more about that to make it real and for the audience to connect with that? Do you want to tell that story of what did you need to resolve with your father? What was it that the baggage that you were carrying that you had to let go?
Yeah, so coming to Australia at 4 years old, and I remember when I did work on this, there was things that I was consciously aware of, and then there were things that I was unconsciously aware of. So I'll start off with one of the unconscious factors because I did a specific process many years ago. I got tools way above this particular tool, but it was a great tool at the time called timeline therapy, created by Ted James, and they were doing a process that dissolves limiting beliefs. And I remember I went back and there was one belief when I was 4 and I came to Australia. My father went from being home regularly, he worked for the government that had regular pay, to coming to Australia. Now he's got 2 children under the age of 5, one on the way. My mum was pregnant, barely spoke English, and the government wouldn't hire him because he was black and it was a very racial time at that particular point. So now he's on the dole and things like that, and he hated that because he didn't want to be paid by the government. He wanted to go out and earn a living.
Yeah.
So he was out constantly trying to get a job, coming back. He was, trying to figure out how to get work. I didn't see him that regularly, and this whole new place scared me. So I created this association. In this one moment, I can't trust him. He's not here when I need him, and I can't trust him. And then that stayed unconsciously within my mind from that point onwards. And I always wondered why, no matter what happened with my father, I'd always have this other feeling like I just can't trust him, even if he did something that aligned with my values. And that's quickly what I was going to say earlier. The nice guy myth is whenever you do things that align with people's values, they'll call you positive and good. Whenever you do things that challenge people's values, they'll call you negative and bad. Because the universe is made up of complementary opposite value systems, where every person you please, you're pissing off somebody else. So you're guaranteed to do both. So pretending to be a nice guy is just subordinating to other people and minimizing your worth. So I don't worry about that. They're labels that people put onto me. I look to be authentic and serve humanity with what I do, knowing that will please and also piss off some people too. But
I heard, just to touch on what you said there, I can't remember who said it. There was a quote that said, "I can't tell you the secret to success, but I can tell you the secret to the definite way of failing, and that's trying to please everybody."
Yes, I like that. That's great. So I had that original one. And then growing up, my father came from a third world country, Rodriguez Island. I always say Mauritius, but it's Rodriguez. And where he grew up, he had 7 sisters, 2 brothers. His dad was a very hard police officer. He was pretty high up in the ranks. And if you did something, you copped a good damn beating for it. And that was perfectly normal. And that's the way that they raised kids at that particular point in time. So I had a very hard childhood, and I had a lot of challenges around my father and felt like nothing was ever good enough. And I carried a lot of that with me alongside that unconscious belief. Well, what I didn't realize is there's 2 sides to things. And I was comparing my life to a particular friend of mine, Anthony, whose parents had been here for a couple of years. So he was 3rd generation. They gave him whatever he wanted. He had a big house, pool, everything that I thought, this is amazing. This is a life that I want. But when I went and attended the Dean Martini breakthrough and I looked at all the perceived positives of my father and saw the negatives of them so I could balance my infatuations instead of comparing him to that. Because until you love somebody for who they are, they can never meet the expectations of what you compare them to. Nobody can ever live up to the fantasy in your head that you create of them. So it's wiser to just love them for who they are.
Yeah.
So when I did that, I didn't feel he had to be all of those things I labeled as positive, because I could see that I had two sides. Now, it didn't matter whether he did them or not.
Yeah.
Then I took all the perceived negatives that he had done, physically hitting me, verbally yelling at me, all of those things. And I realized that I was a kid at a particular point in time that was bullied at school and then bullied at home. And because of his challenges, I ended up doing bodybuilding. Then I ended up becoming very socially empowered. And then I ended up becoming very psychologically empowered. And my friends that I was comparing my life to had a lot of psychological challenges that they never figured out how to resolve. And the only difference between them and me was I had the value for it because they were my voids and they didn't have voids in those areas. So they kind of relaxed. So now in life, they can't figure out how to resolve some of these psychological challenges. I specialize and teach in that, and I do it very quickly. So I realized that we each had a different set of benefits and drawbacks, but there was no need to compare myself to them because they just had a different life than I did. But my life actually has had a lot of benefits because of what I went through. So the minute I was able to balance my perceptions around that, my heart opened. Now, here's the interesting thing. Anytime we exaggerate the positive or the negative, it occupies time and space in our mind.
Yes.
Because our mind's trying to let us know that we're creating destruction and disorder through the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system's job is to regulate chemicals and hormone distributions. That's what we call emotions. But if you exaggerate one side, whether negative or positive, which is the sympathetic or the parasympathetic system, we create disease. So that's why things occupy time and space in our mind. It's our mind trying to say, you're creating physiological disease, so I'm going to create two symptoms for you here in order to help you that you can't escape. Psychologically, I'm going to bring it in your mind and not let it go so you know where to look. Physiologically, I'm going to bring it up in your body through emotions. You either feel too hot or too cold. It just doesn't feel right in what you're experiencing. So now it's kind of like being in a house where the TV's playing really loud and you can't switch it off. But at the same time, the thermostat's too hot or too cold, but you can't put it up or down. So it's altering the environment that you live in to make sure it guarantees that you have an understanding of that. But most of us don't understand that feedback. The minute I addressed those feedbacks, I stopped occupying time and space in my mind. My dad actually went into my art, and I realized that I was thankful for everything that he had done. And if it had happened the way I'd been comparing it to, my life wouldn't be any better. It'd just be different, and I wouldn't be as resilient as I am today. The minute that happened, I had tears of spontaneous gratitude and appreciation. And from that moment, I said, it took me 26 years to hold on to that, and it took me 4 hours to let go of that. So I knew I could do it faster because I only just learned how to do it. So that when you're learning, it takes a little bit longer. So I said, whatever that was, which is the DeMartini method, I want to share that with other people. And I want to show people that they don't have to be slaves and hold these emotions, or their emotions don't have to run them. They can run their emotions. And I dedicated my life to that ever since that occurred. And not only that, my father's one of my best friends today. I went from consistent challenges, wanting to leave the household and get rid of him, to saying, no, I actually want to leave the household so I can take these skills that I've learned from my mother and my father and adapt them to life. Because I can see that if I can go through those challenges and be as resilient as I am today, I want to take those on in an ever bigger way. So I wouldn't have had the relationship I had with him if I hadn't altered my perceptions of that.
And was that process, how did you go through that process of that reconciliation with your dad? From the point of view, did you look at it, you say you looked at the negative behaviors, you're using the terms negative and positive. There was, obviously he got, as his form of discipline, you mentioned, hitting you, which, that was something that happened back in those times, and probably still happens today, but it shouldn't happen. But it did happen then, and you've looked at that as now as a positive because it gave
both.
So you look at it as both.
Yeah,
it's a negative and a positive.
A negative and a positive, but they're equal to each other. Because if I take it away, I don't end up as resilient as I am today, and I've got a lot of emotional challenges. But that was what was necessary to maximize my potential of growth at that particular point in time.
I'm interested. So when you're saying you're looking at it, it is a negative and a positive at the same time. So it is both.
100%.
Yeah. So it was negative. So you're looking at it going, it's a negative because of, it was obviously
it hurt.
Yeah.
At the time,
emotionally, there was issues there. Obviously,
emotionally, I had challenges I had to resolve.
Yeah.
I felt disconnected from other people. But then the benefit was I was already like that. And if my father had been supportive at home and I was being challenged and bullied at school, I just would have reverted to staying at home and running away from the challenges on the outside. But the minute that he challenged me on the inside at the home, I felt that I had to deal with that, and I took actionable steps. One of them was to go to the gym, and I put 10 kilos on my first year, 10 my second, 10 my third year. bodybuilding, and then by my fourth year, I was a sports model. So I went from not being able to talk to women to having women coming and talk to me
Yes.
because they like the way that I look. I also felt socially disempowered, but when I had challenges with my father, I went out and socially started connecting with people to empower myself in that area, which led to me being the doorman. So now I also not only had a social power, but being the doorman at some of the nightclubs that were very well known in Melbourne meant that on the weekend I sometimes had 50 to 60 friend requests on Facebook. So I empowered all 7 areas of my life because of my perceptions of what occurred, not what occurred. We can be a victim of our history by exaggerating the negatives and activating the animal part of our mind, the amygdala, which gets highly emotional, can either see black or white and be fundamental. But every time we do that, we end up in fundamental diseases within the body. Or we can activate a higher part of the mind, the prefrontal cortex, which is the much more evolved part of the mind, which allows you to actually see both sides, and it's the executive center. Resilience only occurs by seeing both sides, but emotional volatility comes by only having an ability to be resilient to one. Every time we try and avoid that which is unavoidable and create a one-sided parallel within the universe, we end up bipolar. We're addicted to monopolar thinking, but we're trying to run away from that of which we can't run away from. I found that I've been more emotionally balanced by seeing both sides of things and figuring out how to use them to my advantage than I ever was when I was addicted to peace and trying to avoid the war, because no matter what I did, the war kept occurring in some other area of my life.
That's an interesting point. So what you're talking about, if I understand correctly, is you're accepting that this is a bad thing, but that's okay.
No, I'm loving it. Accepting still means you're holding on to some aspects of negative. So it's a hard challenge. It's a concept for most people to understand, because the usual dichotomy that society preaches is either positive or negative. I'm teaching that it's neither positive or negative. It's an interesting concept to discover. That's why the only way I can help people do that is by taking them through the DeMartini method and actually going through specific moments in their life and getting them to actually take those moments and see both sides until it clicks. And when they do, usually they have this tier of gratitude and appreciation, and you can see it within their face. Day to day, I work with clients, and a normal case could be I worked with a girl that was raped, I remember, and she said that was a completely negative thing. And I showed her how human physiology worked. And I said, the more you stack up the negatives, you notice that the more it occupies time and space in your mind. She goes, yeah, that's why I'm here. And I said, that's because human physiology does not appreciate exaggerated positives or negatives. It's got to give you feedback. So I said, so if that process worked, the 7 psychiatrists you've seen, that would have worked and you wouldn't be speaking with me today. She goes, okay. I said, until we find meaning, and the word mean means to find the balance of the two. That's the mean. Until we find meaning in this, all we're going to have is polarized perceptions, which create polarized emotions. She said, okay. So we worked through that particular moment in her life, and we actually saw both sides of the specific event that had occurred and the person that had done it to her. And when we did, she ended up crying, and she goes, oh my God, I feel emotionally liberated. I'm in that moment, but my mind can't attach to neither positive or negative. It's actually being grateful for what occurred. I said, please explain to me. She said, at that particular point in my life, I was addicted to drugs and using drugs to run away from my emotions. I was putting myself in more and more challenging circumstances where something was going to happen. And when that gentleman came and physically touched me the way that he did, that I didn't perceive was going to happen, but I knew I was putting myself in circumstances for. From that day forth, I took on personal training. I started looking after my health and vitality. I got out of the circle of those people, and that was the catalyst for me creating change that's helped other people. So if that doesn't occur, it either goes worse or she ends up in a place where she kills herself. She was moving down that place. But that specific event was the reason that she had changed, and now she was helping a lot of people. And if you look at most people that have charities or something, there's some kind of challenge that's occurred that inspired them to go and do that. So the two sides must exist. It's just some people would rather run the story than find meaning and purpose and transition beyond the story.
I wanted to get to that and understand that in detail, because as you mentioned before, if I heard you correctly, you're saying it is not, it's one thing. And where I'm getting to with that, and you've studied English more than I have, even though English is my only language, so I might not explain it as well. But because one of the things that I agree with you from that perspective. It is not a common philosophy, and the words I use for that is Shakespeare wrote in Hamlet, "Nothing is good or bad, thinking makes it so."
Yes.
And an event is an event. We color it with our own experience, whether it's positive or negative or whatever we want to use. But the event is the event. You give it meaning by how you think about it, which if I understand, is a similar, or maybe it's the same principle that we're talking about. It's not, the event isn't positive or negative. It's how you're perceiving it.
Yeah,
Is that?
our science already proves that. If you study quantum entanglement, anybody watching this, go study quantum entanglement. The reason that I love Dr. John Demartini's work is because he's an expert in 100 ologies, and he teaches in all 100 ologies as well, but he's also the Guinness Book record holder for most books read by a human being.
Wow.
So when you speak to him, he'll start off on the atomic level and explain the structure of how the universe works. All atoms have two-sided charges, one a positive and a negative, and every time you play with one side of the frequency, it balances out the other instantaneously, not a moment or second later. Instantaneously, you can't actually break the algorithm within that. But then he takes you through how that actually looks like in the different ologies. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I worked with, every year I work with many cases like this where a person will come in and say, my partner abused me verbally or physically. They did this and they did that. And they'll give me a whole list. And I'll say, okay, just before you do that, and I'll just give them a list of things. Do you usually find that you've got to be the nice person and you have trouble challenging people? Yes. Do you find that you financially subordinate to others? Yes. Mentally subordinate. I'll give them a whole list of things. And they go, how would you know all of those things without speaking to me? I go, because if opposites attract, everything you're telling me about him, you've got to be the opposite of that in order for this dynamic to exist. Because if you're empowered, you cut that dynamic off straight away. So they're actively part of that dynamic, and they think that they're the victim of it, but they don't realize the role that they play, which is disempowering them. And the minute that I'm able to work with that person and show them, because here's a great one, a lady I worked with came in, said all of those things. I said, no, you've been staying in this dynamic because you're getting something from this relationship, which gives you more pleasure than pain, benefits and drawbacks, service and disservice. And she goes, that's true. I said, what is it? And he goes, well, it's the first time a man has loved me like that. And I said, you're associating that it's love, but really it's something that you're exaggerating the positive in, because true love has two sides. That's not two-sided. And so we got down to it. I said, great. When was the first time you physically hit you? She said, I think they were together for 6 months and got married. So it was an infatuation. She hadn't done her research yet. She'd exaggerated positive and married that. But she said, first date. I said, great. When did you leave? And she said, 3 years later. I said, you're going to be hard-boiled to get me to believe that you're not intelligent enough to leave 3 years of that happening on a daily basis, unless you were getting something that was highly more valuable. Secondly, your marker and your boundary is so much further than anyone else's, and there would have been reasons for that occurring prior in your life when you created those original boundaries. She goes, it's true. I'm Muslim. I was told I couldn't do a lot of things. All of a sudden, this man presented the opportunity to have freedom and all of those things. I said, it wasn't until he overstepped, your boundary may have been really far, but it wasn't until he overstepped your boundary and what you found to be too much that then you cut this off. She goes, yes. So I guess you could have done that any time in 3 years because you made the decision and you took that action, but it was up to you to do that. She went, okay, my psychiatrist has just been telling me I'm the victim and letting me come in and day out for years and talk about this and getting paid. I said, I'm not interested in that. Let's find out what you can control and do to alter your perceptions of your worth so we can attract something different. So we're attracting exactly the opposite of what we're willing to earn. So if you minimize yourself, you're going to attract somebody that exaggerates yourself. There are 7 areas of mastery. So if you think you can, if you own that in family, but you don't own that in business, get ready to be bullied in business. If you don't own that in social, you're going to be bullied in social. Every area that you're disempowering yourself, you're going to attract somebody to come in and over-empower you to teach you how to have a value to empower that area.
Yeah, so that I really love what you're talking about there about empowering yourself, not being the victim, and reiterating that, because I know a lot of people that go through that process of visiting psychologists over and over again, just repeating the same thing again and again. But what you're talking about is own it, take the responsibility, and move forward. And I still want to stay with this flow of positive and negative, because I love what you're talking about there from that perspective of owning it as one. And one of the things that I've thought about, and I haven't fully developed this yet, but we look at a battery and we label a battery positive and negative, because that's the way the electron's going to flow. But that could be anything. It could be an arrow rather than positive and negative. But once you connect it to a circuit, becomes flow. It's not really a positive, it's just the directions the atoms flow. And so I was just wondering, is that the state that we get to where we're in the zone, where we've resolved things and we're now in the zone in that space?
Yes. So we have quantum entangled jumps, I call them. So in other words, you alter and move from one level of enlightenment to another. So when I work with a client, say that particular client, we worked on relationships, we altered her perceptions, we empowered her in the relationship realm. But there are 7 areas of mastery. And that was one aspect of a relationship. So she has now brought balance to one particular area. Now she moves to her next level of enlightenment, which is the next delusion that she's going to have to work for and bring balance to empower herself. Because we're moving from one level of delusion to another within our life. So in her case, I remember one aspect of that was career driven. So we had to work through specific challenges she had in her career. So we're constantly moving from one level to another, just the same as a basketball player or anybody else. If you play at just a weekend league and then you get good, you'll get in Australia drafted to play representative basketball. If you play great, you'll play a higher level of representation, which would be one under the NBL, and then you can play the NBL. So there are levels to your growth and evolution, much the same in life too. It's never ending. But you mentioned something that said flow. Flow is nothing more than the embracing of positive and negative. Yeah. Because when you embrace them both equally, you flow like a water moving and a rock comes, it just flows around it. But when you embrace one side and try and run away from the other side keeps rearing up and creating emotional challenges. So you can either revolve where you keep going around the same challenge again and again, or you can evolve where you transition beyond it. But there is no evolving without a balancing and synthesizing of both positive and negative in that. And the more you embrace both sides, the more you have an ability to transition through. But it's this word love. When you truly love it, you're centered, and you actually, because of the way that the autonomic nervous system works, the minute that you have one side more than the other, so let's say that you have a fear in the future, that's known as anxiety, but anxiety transmits as chemical and hormone distributions of adrenaline to the heart. Yeah. Your perceptions have ratios. Yes. So if you were annoyed at something that happened and I said to you, how annoyed are you? Oh, really annoyed. I said, I just want to find out. I could hand you a sheet of paper and say, can you write all the negatives on one side and all the positives on the other? Because it's one thing to have a perception, but to understand your perception, I need to understand the ratio. If you hand back a sheet of paper and it's got 15 negatives and 3 positives, you're at a 1 to 5 ratio within that. So for every positive, you're seeing 5 negatives. That's a high ratio. Anything above 1 to 7 starts to create mental disorders within. So if I see that, I know it's going to occupy time and space in your mind. But I also know if you had a 1 to 2, it just release a little bit of adrenaline. But now that you've gone 1 to 5, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system are way off, and your fight or flight has to activate 5 times as much. The higher that goes, the more you're going to create disease and disorder through the heart muscle because you're making it actively work way more than it needs to within that. So the embracing of both sides actually brings back the normality. And if you speak to a chiropractor, they'll tell you that. They'll say they're trying to bring back a synthesis of balance between your autonomic nervous system, so the chemical and hormone distribution can be balanced on the parasympathetic and sympathetic. And neither of these are good or bad, because part of it is rest and relaxation at nighttime, and that's helping you to actually get things back. And then the other part is anabolic and during the day. You can look at it as a masculine and a feminine. You need both of those to survive. But if we only activate one, we usually have some kind of physiological challenges within us. And because all emotions come through different organs, anxiety is one, but we can create dopamine and a range of other emotions that go through other organs to create that. Every time that we have too much, an excess or a deficiency, we create challenges within different organs. And that's why we have different organ diseases.
Wow. The third point that you talked about there was the integration of owning your own traits. And you also talked about love as being the center of that.
Yes.
Is there a distinction to make that easier for people to make a distinction between who you are and your behaviors? Because a lot of time people will associate their identity with their behavior. So they might get angry in a situation, and then beat themselves up about them being a bad person for being angry. But that was just a behavior. And it's a similar sort of thing in other people as well. We can associate a behavior to the person and not realize that that's just a behavior. How can a person, one, is that a distinction people should make? And if so, how do we distinguish a behavior and that not being linked to our self-worth, that inside we are actually this being of love?
Well, a couple of things. And once again, for me, it's the application of the DeMartini method, because I can give as words as possible. When I take a person through the process, there's very specific columns, and there are markers on there to make sure you've done that. But the first thing is to live authentically and congruently within yourself. If you're comparing yourself to others or living in outer authorities or injecting other people's values into you, you're always going to call yourself good or bad. If you're living authentically in accordance to your own values, you're just living, and you become present. But so here's a great example. My father's very Catholic. I'm an atheist. Growing up within that family dynamic, I had to learn how to find my place and communicate. That was no longer a belief system. But as long as I tried to live within his values, I always found that I could never live up to it. I was constantly moving towards questioning the religion and questioning aspects of it, and nobody would give me answers. And then I'd try and just say that's the way it is. And there was always some symptomology psychologically and physiologically inside of me getting me to go back to this authenticity, and I couldn't run away from it. So there was no way I could escape that symptom. The minute I started actually studying not only the religion and the positives and the negatives, but having a look at the other 4,600 plus religions and the beliefs and the delusions and the positives and the negatives of them, I then had quantum awareness, and I felt like I could make a rational decision. And the minute I started living within my own life, all those symptoms dissipated and dissolved. So that's the first one. As long as you're injecting other people's values into you instead of living authentically with who you are, you're always guaranteed to experience symptomology to bring you back to authenticity. That's not what's wrong with you. That's the way you're designed to be. There's a process on learning how to take somebody off a pedestal, because you only put people on a pedestal that you exaggerate the positives in and look up to, and are minimizing those aspects in yourself. So that's one of the first things you've got to do. You've got to take the one or many people you have and bring them off a pedestal. In that, there's a few different things I can mention just quickly here. The first one was, as I'd said, take all the perceived positives of that person, own them within myself until they're equal. Now I'm just looking at somebody eye to eye instead of looking at them above and me down.
Yes.
And it's a balancing game, because I cannot have a person go up without me going down. There's no point where you stay equal to them unless you do this process. That anytime you look up or down, there's this happen.
Yes.
But so that's the first part. Then I take the trait that I'm seeing in them that I'm exaggerating the positive in, and say a really great one. People go, I love somebody that's smart, or a partner that's very educated. I remember having that and seeing that in Dr. John D. Martini and putting that on a pedestal. So I owned it in myself. Then I saw the drawbacks of it, and I realized it comes out as arrogance half the time. And if my friends ask me a simple question about human behavior and I start to go on a rant, they go, I don't really care about that. I just want you to listen. So
I've been there.
So there's another side to that. And I realized that as long as it was one-sided, I was going to attract people to tell me the other side of it, because I couldn't see it, to try and humble me and bring me back to seeing two sides of it. Yeah. So seeing both sides of that trait in the other person, now they're just a regular person. Because the only reason you put them on a pedestal is because you exaggerated something and minimized it in you. If you see it equal in you and you see that it has two sides, they're just a regular person. Then owning that in you, balancing that in you. Then there's another column where you take whatever you've exaggerated in them. Because usually when you exaggerate something like a person's intelligence, that's a confirmation bias that they do that more. But then you also create a disconfirmation bias that they do the opposite. Now that can't be the case. Your genius is in whatever's highest in your values, because that's where you have information retention order. But your idiot is whatever's lowest in your values.
Yes.
My missus loves the garden. She tells me things about it all the time, and occasionally I listen. So, and sometimes she'll
can relate to that. Yes.
Yeah. She goes, the duranculas or whatever it is, and this and that. And I go, what? She goes, I've told you about that every day this week. I go, really? She goes, yeah, I was just going to tell you that I've been doing this thing. You've been saying yes. And I've realized I've just gone into an automatic screensaver while I think about things that are more valuable to me.
It's a man thing. We nod and go, yes.
True. Because we're created by what's highest in our values, and we delete whatever's lowest in our values because our body's trying to run for its most efficient state and live on purpose. So she does the same thing to me.
Yes.
Within that. So then you have a look and I find out, where's this idiot? And I realize he hasn't driven a car in 40 years. He hasn't actually cooked food. He has no clue how to do that because he's been traveling around the world doing talks every day and people cook food for him. And I went through a range of things and I went, oh, he does have intelligence in his values.
Yes.
But he also has no intelligence in these other areas. So that brings the person back to a balanced state, and you realize that they're a two-sided person, just like a two-sided coin. Then one of the last things that I love to see in the particular DeMartini method, you take what you're infatuated with them in, and then you see if in that same moment they've done the opposite, what's the benefit to you? And then you realize that this person can display either the trait or the anti-trait. It doesn't make a difference. You're grateful for both. You're owning both. you've increased your worth, and now they're an equal to you. So that's part of what the method does. So if you balance your perceptions of other people, obviously, like I said, if you balance your emotional baggage, every time you balance emotional baggage, you have presence. Every time that you hold on to 1, 2, or 5 or 10 things, because you can create it every day in your life, new anchors and triggers, then there's other things in your environment that remind you of that, keep triggering them off. And now you're reacting instead of proacting in what's happening. And you're just reacting to the same thing and creating the same life by doing the same thing, Einstein's definition of insanity. But then the last part was owning every part of you. If you're going to do something profound within this world, you are going to piss off people like you have never believed before.
Yes.
What I teach about positives and negatives and balancing those perceptions, I know it works because I've worked with thousands of clients in 11 years, and I have heartfelt moments. We end up with tears of gratitude on a weekly basis as they dissolve their emotional baggage after 7 or 8 years of trying to do that and let it go.
Yes.
But for everything that I say, there's a psychiatrist or psychologist that's helping people run their stories out there that's frustrated by what I'm doing and pissed off at it, and they're going to challenge what I have to offer. And they're living within their authenticity, and I'm living within mine. But I'm not going to minimize my voice because I can see what this does. If anything, I'm trying to increase it, but that means an increased audience to get frustrated at what I do as well as appreciate what I do.
I love that. With that authenticity, how much of that is what I've got here? How much of it is recognizing that in the moment you did the best you could? Because we can all look back in hindsight and go, oh, I should have done this and should have done that. But in the moment, you did the best you could. And even if you had knowledge, and I think you understand the difference between conscious understanding and unconscious behavior. Even if you have knowledge, because we've all thought we've understood something, tried to do it and messed it up horribly because we didn't have it at an unconscious level to action it. And then other times we've thought we haven't, we thought we didn't know something and surprised ourselves how well we did. How much of this recognizing authenticity is recognizing in the moment you did the best that you could at that point in time, and how does that link to being able to lift your own self-esteem and just saying, look, I did the best I could at that time. I will do better. I screwed it up, but I'll do better next time.
Well, I never really worry about trying to lift my self-esteem because in a balanced state, I realize there's nothing to lift. There's just imbalanced perceptions. So I never really worry about that part. But when my clients talk to me, they say, if I balance everything, we'll end up being a robot. And I go, no, because you have different levels of evolution. So when you balance something, you increase your resilience in that area, but there's a never-ending amount of challenges as you evolve. So, for example, you may get used to living by yourself and create a successful business, financial mastery, mental mastery, have a few challenges in your family, so now you're working on that. Then you meet a partner, and now the relationship, you've got to add a different element to that and increase the mastery in that. But then you get that going, and then all of a sudden you get engaged. Now you've got their family and yours, and there's another level of that, and they're expecting more out of your business. So there's always this other level of growth. Yeah. So am I in a state of always being balanced? Hell no. I've got moments where I get so frustrated at myself or my fiance about things that happen. Am I doing it as regularly as I used to before I created these levels of balance? No, because now I'm able to pick up on it sooner. So what I say to my clients is when they ask a very similar question to what you asked, you're a human being and you're going to go through human emotions, but human emotions are feedbacks because you either have positive emotions, negative emotions, or synthesized emotions, which is love. So if you have a positive or a negative, well, let me start off by showing you all core emotions come from the amygdala, and the amygdala wants to do two things. It wants to avoid a predator and it wants to seek a prey. So it's infatuated with eating and having prey, but it's avoiding the predator. It's a primitive response that we had inside of ourselves for survival. So every time that something happens in front of us that we emotionally react to, generally the emotions occur faster unless we build up the higher part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, because the receptors to that are faster, because if it's a dangerous circumstance, it needs to be activated faster.
Yes.
But the more you do the balancing exercises, the more you actually start to get out of those challenges faster. But I never worry if I have an emotional reaction to something, because whatever I emotionally reacted to had a benefit and a drawback, and quite often it's a feedback mechanism. So say, for example, I raise my voice and get annoyed at my fiance. When I go back and look at the benefits and the drawbacks of it, I usually find that there was something that occurred within that moment that led to that occurring. So let's say that she was asking me to do a lot of things, minimizing and not understanding my value, but increasing hers. And then I was trying to explain that to her, but she wasn't getting it. And eventually I popped because I had other things to do and I just didn't feel I had time in that moment. I look at all the benefits to her because that dissolves the shame and the guilt. And I go, well, she actually considered it afterwards. She came back. We communicated more effectively. It got her to move away so I could focus on those other parts of business that I was trying to communicate. And it got me to actually look at her in a more balanced state. Then I look at the benefits to me as well as the drawbacks. By the time I assess that later on and I see both sides, I become grateful and appreciative. I can give you one great metaphor. My fiance, this is a real circumstance, but I call it a metaphor, a story. My fiance, when we first started dating, came home late. She is the master chef. She can make foods from all around the world.
Yeah.
I will burn water. So I have 3 meals. I do great, and they've lasted me for about 8.5 years of our relationship. So I'm happy to stretch them out. But she came home and she was late. Usually she'd come home at 6 o'clock. To start off with, I used to live in Melbourne. She used to live in Sydney. We'd fly back and forth for 6 months to date each other.
Yes.
But then we moved in together, so we created a bit of a routine. This is the first couple of months into it. And she came into the house, and she was late. It was about 8 o'clock. And the first thing she did was, in this particular tone, she goes, "Hey, babe," almost tiptoeing. When we're unauthentic, we tiptoe on our soul.
Yes.
So she's tiptoeing, "Hey, babe, I'm so sorry I'm late." I just looked at her because I don't take apologies. I take authenticity. If you apologize, you're going to minimize yourself compared to somebody else and then try and do a lot of things in order to bring it back into balance. But the minute that you do that, you're minimizing yourself. I've never seen a person apologize and not minimize himself. But her tone said it too. She went, "Hey, I'm so sorry." And she goes, "Oh, you don't take apologies." I said, "Babe, come and sit down." So she came and sat on my lap and we had a hug. And she goes, "So what do you specifically perceive that you did that caused me more pain than pleasure, drawbacks and benefits?" And she goes, "I was late." I said, "Yeah, but it wasn't you being late. It's what you think you being late represents." She goes, "All right, not being able to make food because I know you're not as good at that and you usually work very late and that kind of thing." I said, "Great. What are the benefits to me? And I'm going to help you as well." So we stacked 100 benefits. She did about 60. I told her 40 benefits that I got in her not being there and how it actually served me. And she went from, "I'm sorry," to you could see her shoulders start to come back and her physiology change and she was smiling. And I said, "Great. What would have been the drawbacks if you'd been on time?" She listed, once again, about a good 60. I listed 40. Didn't take us long. Been doing this for a while.
Yeah,
and you can see
you're doing really well.
Yeah, we just bounced off each other. It was really quick. And you see this confidence in her. And then she walked over to the kitchen. And you could see that she went from, she would have spent the rest of the night minimizing herself and trying to make it up to me, to just this presence and gratitude for what she had done. Because that's going to happen again in the future. And then she walked away. I said, "By the way, babe, why were you late?" And she goes, so remember when she walked in, it was, "Hey, I'm sorry." And then all of a sudden she went, "Oh, the girls and I were working on this project," and all this energy shot through her. So I started laughing and I said, "You were late because you were doing what inspired you. And when you get inspired, you lose space and time.
Yes.
When you're doing things you dislike, space and time increases. You get to work at 9 o'clock. You go, "Is it 5 yet?" "Oh, crap, it's still 9." Because it increases. But when you're doing what you love, it shrinks and you forget about space and time and get present in the moment. So I looked at her, I said, "You were late because you were doing what you love. You lost track of time and you were doing that with your team and you were having an inspiring moment." She goes, "Yes." I said, You're gonna choose that every time over coming home on time." And she laughed. She goes, "Actually, that's true." So I said, "So your apology didn't even mean anything?" She goes, "Actually, that's true because I was having a moment of inspiration and I would do it again in a heartbeat and you do that to me every time." I said, "Of course, because the more inspired you are, the less I have to deal with any part of you because usually you bring great energy home." So at the end of that, I said, "By the way, what would have happened in the past?" She goes, "I'd get home, I'd do that. My ex would take advantage of that, constantly say things about it." And this isn't saying that ex was good or bad. It's just a repetitive pattern relationships do. Use that against me until at the end of the night, eventually I said, "That's enough. I've made up for it." And then that's what they would have, but you'd hold on to that. And then that would be a repetitive cycle. She goes, "There's nothing to hold on to. I'm grateful for what I've done and what I didn't do. You're grateful for what I did and what I didn't do. We just have a moment of gratitude and appreciation." I go, "Great." And from that point onwards, doesn't matter when she comes home late or when I do, we've never had an argument about that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. With that, how much of that, from a person's perspective, using your example there of a person going through that process, and how much of it is listening to yourself that you're actually in that, like if listening to herself, and if she had have gone, "Okay, I'm feeling this need to apologize. What is that?" and gone through that process herself, could she have done that? And how would she do that? How would you recommend someone to do that?
Well, she's a facilitator, just like me. So she's qualified within exactly the same field and works within the company. When I first met
but I
her,
mean, for an ordinary person that doesn't have that experience, what steps could they go through to do that? Maybe
They have to,
auto-aggression is the right
they'd have
term,
to
but
learn the DiMartini method. And the reason I say that for a specialized facilitator such as myself, but the reason I say that is because if you don't have a facilitator there to assist you, you'll stop at a certain point. You'll say, I don't have any more answers. The reality is you do have more answers. You just haven't asked the right set of questions, because the quality of your life comes down to the quality of the questions that you ask yourself. And a question is a quest for an ion, and an ion is an imbalanced particle. So seeing half of it, but not seeing the other half. And every time we see half, we have compressed ions, compression, and tense ions in the body, tension. But the minute that we bring it into balance, that's when we actually release those two. That's why a lot of clients I work with release that. But the simple way of saying it is to see both sides of the event. But the problem is when a person's in the animal mind will take over, and it'll have biased statements such as, I can tell when a person's biased because I'll say, what was the benefit of your father verbally yelling at you in that moment? And immediately, because thinking takes time, they'll go, there is none. I go, ask that question, and if I get to your answer, there wasn't even a second in between. Therefore, there was no thinking that was done.
Correct.
Now, a facilitator will hold you accountable and say, get present in that moment. What were the benefits? Well, actually, I noticed that I'd been minimizing myself. When my dad challenged me, I let go of being addicted to him and started to listen to myself. Great. How did that help you? Well, I actually started doing things on myself and increased my self-worth. How did that help you? That led to me meeting my partner because I left the household and started actively doing things. So we actually, once they take the time to look at it, they realize this was a two-sided event, not a one-sided event. There's no such thing as a one-sided event. And the thing I love about that is I work with extreme cases, bullying, rape, everything. These are the people that deserve help equally, if not more, than anybody else in society.
Yeah.
The most extreme cases, when they bring balance to it, are the ones that generally go out and serve the same people the most. They get inspired in that area to help other people. The people that have only gone through subtle challenges generally don't have as much of a desire to serve humanity. So it's very interesting how a person can go from the lower end of the spectrum of being the victim in that area and the one that everyone's helping to then being the one that's helping everybody else once they learn how to alter their perceptions around that. Because the tool that I'm teaching, I always apply it to a client's biggest challenges. So then that way, when something occurs, and this happens naturally, I'll work with a client, let's say it's a 6-week consultation structure, we dissolve their biggest thing. Then something happens at work and they go, I haven't been as stressed at work. I know why. But they want to, I wonder what that is. And I'll ask them and I'll say, whatever happened at work, did you start to see the other side of it unconsciously? And they go, actually, it's true. Normally, I'd say my boss did X, Y, and Z, and that pisses me off. I started to see how I could use that to my advantage to actually further my career and what the benefits of that was and how it was keeping me humble, but also challenged me to grow my career, and that was going to increase my money. So I guess the minute that you saw both sides, it was on the way. But before, when you were used to seeing one side, it was in the way. The problem is the more stuff you accumulate and put in the way, what started off as carrying one kilo bag ends up being carrying a Tonka truck of 1 million kilos worth of baggage, and it just gets heavier.
Yeah, wonderful. I want to shift a bit because we must be having, well, I'm having a good time because time has flown and I'm just looked at the clock and going, okay, we're going to end soon because I know you've got another meeting. So I want to shift a little bit because I'd love to keep talking about what you're talking about, but we are going to run out of time. One thing I noticed that you have on your website, and I haven't seen many people do this, but you have a mission statement. And it stood out for me because I have my own mission statement as well, but I don't know many people that actually have their own mission statement. Talk us through that process as to why you wrote a mission statement and how it's helped your life. Because I know from my perspective, it provided me with a lot of clarity whenever something has come up and kept me focused. What drove you to write a mission statement and how has it helped you?
Well, I don't believe you can live a truly authentic and meaningful life without getting clear on what that means. Yeah. And you can leave it in your mind, but I forgot I remember ages ago reading what they presume to be the average amount of thoughts within your mind, but it was a ridiculous number. Let's call it 20 million. If you have 20 million thoughts in your mind and you want to collect a few of those that are important and just hope that they stay important to you, they're probably not going to, because there's too many things floating in between them. At some stage, to turn something from a dream, which is kind of like a metaphorical, non-touchable place within your mind where it's all soft, into a tangible reality, you've got to pluck some of those out and put them onto paper. And putting them onto paper is actively taking the time to say, well, that's important in this stream of consciousness that continues to go through my mind. And then you've got to take whatever it is, whether you type it up or put it on paper, and put that into a time space horizon when you're actually going to achieve it. So we have 7 areas of mastery. And when I first started balancing things, I realized that in every area I was balancing, it was actually the area that I had the biggest void and the biggest challenges, and the one I was avoiding the most. So what I ran away from, I kept running into. So I thought, well, instead of waiting for the universe to bring massive challenges to me, why don't I choose what I'm inspired to actually work on in each of these areas of life? So then that way, instead of sitting there with a little, I always have this image of me with a butter knife kind of cutting my toast, and then the universe rocks up with a tank and a full, army. And I'm like, well, this isn't a fair fight. Now why don't I load myself up and rock up to the universe when they're eating breakfast and go, oh, how do you like these apples? If I can't avoid the challenges, I may as well set the tone as to when we're doing it, and let's go. So that was the image that I had in my head. So I wrote down the 7 areas of life, and then I wrote what was most inspired to achieve within those areas of life. Now, I've got a company, Quantum Equilibrium, but then I've got my own personal website that represents my branding. Because if you Google me online, I don't want you to have to try and sift through the stuff to figure out who I am. I just wanted to put it in one place. So I put my mission statement on there so people could clearly identify and say, this is what this man is dedicated to. And his life should represent that. And if you watch my content and look at my interviews and everything else, they'll say he's done a crazy amount of interviews. This year, I'm going for a record in terms of how many podcasts and conversations I'm having globally. And it's because I want people to look and see that mission wasn't just writing on the wall. His life is congruently aligned with that. But that's why I do it. But I'm very regimented with my timetable as well. I put what I'm going to do up until a couple of weeks in advance, because I found that idle hands lead to very, very low priority distractions instead of high priority actions. So many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I started just filling out my timetable with as many things that inspired me as possible. But then there's 4 pillars that I can give to people that maximize wellness and well-being, and end up with what most people call peace. I'm going to call the embracing of peace and war for a much more balanced mindset. And a balanced mind is one that feels clearer.
Yes.
People call that peace, but it's not really, because when you're embracing peace and war and you have clarity, it's a transcendent level instead of avoidance of that. So the first one, watch what you put in your body. If you're going to drink Coke all day and have pizzas and things like that, I don't care how organic the pizzas are, you have physiological symptoms inside of your body because of that. So the body is the vessel. So your Lamborghini to drive around in life. If you treat it like a rent-a-bomb, it will act like a bomb and die out very quickly on you.
Yes.
So that's the first one. And it rewards you, because if you think about it, the more great foods you put inside of yourself, you can think a lot clearer. It's just, there's no denying physiologically looking after yourself creates psychological balance to a degree. That's the first one. Secondly, psychologically bring balance to your perceptions and your emotions so that you can have a clear mind. Now your body's operating at a great degree. The Lamborghini's ready to go. And if you're not working on your thoughts, but you look after your body, it's like eating pizza or going for a run. In that, you're counterintuitive to what you're attempting to do. The third is to do what you love and love what you do. And then the fourth is to set goals in all 7 areas and dictate how you're inspired to live your life. If you do that, I guarantee you'll have energy and vitality for days. Time and space will dissipate. Your whole days will disappear. You go, where the hell did that day go? Within that, you'll have clearer thinking, and you'll maximize human potential within that. And I've proved it, because I work with people that are retired, and they could be in their 80s, and people say, how are they still working out and doing this and that? I said, every day they wake up, they've got meaning and purpose in all areas of life, and they're waking up to do that. And the human body is an organism, part of an environment, not just planet Earth, but even bigger one, the universe. And anything that isn't serving its purpose becomes extinct. That's why 99% of all animals are extinct, or life on planet Earth. There's only 1% left, and that's the life that serves meaning and purpose.
Yeah, and I agree with that completely. Certainly, from my perspective, what you're talking about, those 4 pillars of health, mind, loving what you do, and setting goals, gives you that energy. And from my perspective, I was working till 1 o'clock last night, and then I got up at 6 o'clock to get ready for this interview this morning. I had another meeting, and then I had another meeting, and now I had this meeting. So I've lost track of meetings now, but I don't feel tired. So I'm just reiterating for the audience that this really works. What Emmanuel's sharing is a foundation for giving yourself energy. Before we run out of time, do you want to talk a little bit about Quantum Equilibrium, the products and services that you you offer, the specific things that people can come to you for, and it's your chance to spruik your wares in this part of the podcast. Product placement, I agree with. I don't like ads, but product placement, go for.
No problems. So we do a few things. We work one-on-one and one-on-many. So for the one-on-one consultation packages, it doesn't matter what experience you're having, whether it's anxiety, depression, bipolar, goal setting. You want to increase your relationship growth. You want to increase your financial potential in all 7 areas of life: physical, financial, mental, spiritual, social, vocation, and family. We have one-on-one packages where you can either work with myself or another qualified equilibrium specialist like my fiance. All of our specialists guarantee the results that we achieve. So if you come and you're experiencing depression, we get down to what is the root cause of your depression. Everybody's different. My father passed away, so we work with grief, etc. We create results in all of those. So our one-on-one packages you could have a look at as working with a specialist that's achieving a result. We're not interested in doing 101 consultations with you where we get paid, but you're just sitting there paying us and talking about the same thing. That's not an equal exchange. To us, you should be bypassing that specific challenge. That's what you came to us for, learning the tools to actually transition out of that challenge, and then learning the tools to have for future challenges. So you've got more challenges ahead of you than what you have that we're going to work on in the past. We want to teach you how to be able to do that in minutes and hours instead of weeks, months, or years. Yes. That's our one-on-one packages. Our one-on-many, they're inspirational talks. I speak in front of audiences, whether online or in groups, and teach workshops, and we can cater for those within all areas. Tomorrow, I'm doing a presentation, and it's for the government. I do one with them probably every couple of years, and it's going to be assisting some of the particular group within the government anyway, to increase their resilience and have tools to bypass the challenges that they're currently experiencing and future challenges within minutes and hours, very specific exercises they can complete themselves without needing me there. But then quite often afterwards, a lot of the women that I'll be working with, this is the 6 women I'm working with, they may work with me for a couple of months or on our yearly packages, etc., and work one-on-one to just specifically speed up that and learn those tools to a greater degree. So I can speak if you've got a certain group or people or an industry or a business where you've got specific things you'd like me to speak on and advance your level of evolution, knowledge, and growth for your staff. But I can also work one-on-one with yourself or others. So that's probably the best way to explain it.
Fantastic. And the best way to contact you, is it via your website? I'll put that in the show notes, but do you want to reiterate the best ways of contacting you?
Yeah, so I'll send you a PDF that has like a really just everything succinctly in there. But you can visit my website, emmanuelanthony.com.au. We're currently just rebuilding the Quantum Equilibrium website, so that should be launched by the end of the year. And we get that exactly how we want. We want that a little more technologically sound based on where we're moving as a company. I'll leave a link below for a complimentary 20-minute discovery call. That's if you feel anywhere around the world that there's something that resonated with you in this show and you'd think that we could work together to help you in that area. That's an opportunity to have what I call a virtual coffee. No matter where you are around the world, we can both have a coffee, have a conversation, find out where you are. And there's a few things that happen in that call. Number one, I'm going to listen to what it is that you're specifically saying is your major challenges, obstacles, and goals. The second thing I'm going to do is bring clarity as to how you got there, what specifically is occurring psychologically, physiologically, what you're attracting, and why these challenges are coming your way, because quite often they're repetitive. People are revolving around a similar thing and they want to evolve beyond it, and then give you exact solutions and a time frame in which we can achieve that as well. So I'll make sure that that's open and available for you guys too.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for offering that to the listeners. It's wonderful. Emmanuel, before we wind up, what are some, if you were to sum up key wisdoms or key wisdom, your choice, what would it be? What would be the thing that you want the audience to take away?
The number one thing would be to work on yourself and do things that create specific results this year. We're in January 2023. I'm not sure when this will upload, maybe usually a couple of weeks or a couple of months later, but this can be the year that you provide yourself a launch pad to have an amazing and inspiring life. Head to drdemartini.com, go to the values section and get crystal clear on what your unique set of values are, because that's what's going to unlock your potential, your energy, your vitality. It's going to shrink space and time and increase your wellness by having an increase of eustress, taking on support and challenge in an area you're inspired by, compared to de-stress within that. So I recommend that you take the time to actually find out what your unique set of values are. I do it every single month. Then set your goals in congruency with your unique set of values and watch your self-confidence and self-worth skyrocket by doing what you're here to do. There's only one of you. That's it. Your eyewitness specific, fingerprint specific. If you do not awaken your genius and share it with the world, it doesn't have to be something profound like being a speaker or a consultant or something like that. You may be a mother that's inspired to raise beautiful children, but getting authentic with that, honoring that, setting a mission around that, and waking up every day and dedicating yourself to that, it's just going to give you purpose like you've never had before. So you're here to share that with the world and the universe. Give yourself permission to do that to the greatest degree.
Love that, Emmanuel. Emmanuel H Anthony, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. Have a wonderful 2023, no doubt you will, and I'm looking forward to hearing about those goals that you've achieved, the number of speaking events, all those kind of things that you've set for yourself, and seeing that you've achieved that. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.